Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about a different protocol, TCP or Transmission Control Protocol. Okay, so previously I have talked about ARP, DNS, and HTTP, and SMTP and POP3. Alright, so now the protocol I'm going to talk about is known as TCP or Transmission Control Protocol. So at first, we should know what TCP is. So basically, TCP works as an underlying connection when we need to run the HTTP protocol. Alright, so whenever we want to browse something, maybe www.google.com or facebook.com, so whenever we want to browse a website, basically the HTTP protocol usually helps us to get the contents of that specific website. But for that specific protocol to run, there is another protocol which is absolutely necessary every time the HTTP runs. Alright, so that protocol is known as TCP. Basically, TCP creates the underlying connection of HTTP, which helps HTTP to pass the content from server to the destination, from the server to the user. Alright, so this is how actually TCP works. So the HTTP program layer asks the TCP layer to set up the connection and send the file. Okay, so that's what I have said, that the TCP works as the underlying connection which helps HTTP to send to request and send the file between server and user. Okay, so for TCP to work, a connection has to be established at first. So basically, TCP is a connection oriented protocol. That means a connection needs to be set up at the very beginning. So we'll talk about it a few minutes later. Okay, so basically TCP is divided into three different parts. So first part is connection establishment, second part is data transfer, third part is connection termination. So we're going to talk about all of them within a few moments. So at first, let's talk about connection establishment. Okay, so previously I have talked about that TCP is a protocol where a connection needs to be set up at first, right? So here I'm going to talk about how this connection can actually be set up. That means how we can actually establish a connection so that we can further continue our communication between sender and receiver. Okay, so let's talk about the connection establishment phase. Okay, so let's talk about connection establishment. So basically there are two different sides. One is user and the other is server. So the example we're trying to demonstrate is actually like this, that a user wants to browse something, maybe google.com or facebook.com, so he wants to browse a website. Alright, so in that case there are two sides, one is user and the other is the website server. So let's check how this connection can actually be established between these two sides. So at first, a communication will take place between user and the server, and the communication will go from user to the server. This is the very first phase. This is the very first step of this phase, connection establishment. Okay, so in this communication there will be two different numbers. So one is known as sequence number and the other is known as acknowledgement number. So sequence number is usually denoted by S, and acknowledgement number is usually denoted by A. Okay, so you can see here that I have put S equal to 0 and A equals to 0. So I will be explaining it a few moments later, that why I actually did put some values beside those alphabets. Alright, so I will explain that within a bit. Okay, so let me first tell you what a sequence number is. So sequence number is used to keep track of how much data it has sent. Okay, so basically sequence number is like an ID number. Okay, so it is indicating the starting of the bits, the starting of the bytes which we are trying to send, and it also helps us to keep track of how much data we are actually sending to the server. And what is acknowledgement? Acknowledgement number indicates the next expected sequence number from the opposite side. That means right here the acknowledgement is shown for this communication, but this acknowledgement is actually indicating the next expected sequence number from the opposite side's communication. That means this, if this communication is from user to server, then acknowledgement indicates the next expected sequence number for the communication which will go from server to user. Okay, so this is what acknowledgement means. So there is a very close relationship between the acknowledgement of one step with the sequence number of its next step from the opposite side. Alright, so we'll see some examples regarding this within a bit. So let's move on. Okay, so this is the very first communication between user and server. So there are two numbers, S and A, sequence number and acknowledgement number. Alright, so the very first since this is the very first communication from user to server, so that's why the sequence number will start from 0. So in real life, this sequence number may start from a random number, like it could be 500 or maybe like 5000. So it could be a random number, but here for our convenience, let's just consider that this number will be 0. So see, this is the very first communication and the sequence number for this communication will be 0. Okay, and you can see that the acknowledgement number is 0 too. So why is the acknowledgement number 0? So the acknowledgement number is 0 because it expects 0 as the next sequence number from the opposite side's communication. Okay, just what I have told a few minutes ago. That means that this acknowledgement number 0 indicates that the communication which will be happening from server to user will have the sequence number as 0. Alright, so we'll check it out. Okay, so this is the very first communication. Since this is the very first communication, the sequence number is 0 and acknowledgement number is indicating 0 here too. Okay, so let's check the next step. Okay, so another thing is in this communication only one byte of data is sent. Okay, only one byte of data is sent. So let's see what happens if one byte of data is sent from user to server. Okay, so now let's check the second step. So the second step will definitely take place between user and server, and it will be directed from server to user. So this is the second step of this connection establishment phase. Alright, so you can see that in this step the sequence number is 0. So why is the sequence number 0? Because this is the very first communication from server to user. You might get confused that I have already communicated between user and server, but that communication was from user to server. There was no prior communication from server to user. So this is the very first communication from server to user. That's why the sequence number for this communication will be 0. Alright, and the acknowledgement number is 1. Okay, so the sequence number is 0. I can verify it in another way, like the acknowledgement number in the previous step from the opposite side was actually 0. So the sequence number here should be 0. Okay, so that's why the sequence number is 0, and here you can see that the acknowledgement number is 1. So let me tell you why the acknowledgement number is 1 here. So in our previous step, we've seen that from user to server only one byte of data was sent, right? So the byte was we started the counting from byte 0. Okay, that was 0th byte, and that byte was transferred from user to server. That one byte was sent from user to server. So if the 0th byte is already sent to the server, then what will the server expect? Okay, so the server will expect that, yeah, I already got the 0th byte from user, so when it sends me the next byte, it should have a sequence number of 1, right? So that's why it is acknowledging that, yeah, my acknowledgement number is 1. That means I expect the byte number which is numbered 1 in the next communication coming from user to server. Okay, so this is the explanation written here. One byte of data was sent from user to server in the previous step. So that's why A equals to 1 in this step, because that one byte was actually the 0th long byte. Okay, the 0 numbered byte. So that's why the acknowledgement number is 1, because it is expecting that the next communication which will take place from user to server, that specific communication should have a sequence number of 1. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so another thing, in this communication from server to user, 1 byte of data is sent to, just like the previous step, 1 byte of data is sent in this communication too. Okay, so you might get confused now that why are we actually sending those 1 bytes of data. Okay, so let me tell you that this is a very important thing. uh, those bytes are actually sent to ensure that there is an establishment between user and the server. So 1 byte of data was sent from user to server, and then another byte of data was sent from server to user. So this is just like saying that I want to work with a specific person, but I don't really know him. Okay, so if I want to know him, then I might need to set up a basic communication with him at first. So the very first thing would be like asking him that what is his name. Okay, so I may ask him a simple question and he will definitely respond. So once he responds, then we'll have the flow of starting a good communication with each other, right? So there's the thing, like we just want to establish a basic communication, and this is what's happening right here. All right, so the user and the website server actually want to create a good communication between them, so they want to set up an establishment, a connection establishment. So that's why the user send only 1 byte of data to the server just to test whether the server actually responds or not, and the server actually responded with another byte. So this is basically those bytes over here are actually used just to test both the sides, both the user and the website server. Okay, so since both user and server could actually send the bytes, so we can say that yeah, a connection is now established because user just tested the server by sending 1 byte, and the server actually responded by sending 1 byte too. So both of them actually are communicating with each other. So yeah, a connection has been established. So now we can actually move to our next step. Okay, so basically this looks something like this one right now. The figure looks like this one, and the last step of this first phase, connection establishment phase, is actually this communication. So this communication is interesting. So you can see that in the previous two steps, 1 byte of data was sent from both sides. So that's where the connection establishment phase was done. And in the very last step here, so this is only for the acknowledgement from the user. It's like if I am the user, then I want to set up a connection with the server. So I send the server something, then the server responds me with something back. Okay, so the connection is already on the way to be established, right? So the only thing left for me to do is that yeah, I acknowledge that I actually requested and the server actually responded. So the only thing left for me is to acknowledge this fact. Okay, so that's why the in this communication right here, you can see only the acknowledgement number. All right, so for this communication from user to server, only acknowledgement number will be there, and acknowledgement number is actually 1 here. So let me tell you why it is 1 here. So you can see that in the previous step from server to user, the 0 numbered byte was sent from server to user, and only 1 byte of data was sent, right? So since that specific byte, the 0 numbered byte, was already sent from server to user, so the server will definitely expect that the next byte it gets from, so the user will definitely expect that the next byte it gets from the server should have a sequence number of 1. That's why it is putting acknowledgement number as 1 here. Remember that acknowledgement number is basically the expected sequence number, the next expected sequence number from the opposite side's communication. Alright, so that's why it's putting 1 here, because it already it had already received the 0 numbered byte from the server. So it is expecting that the next byte which the server will send should have the sequence number of 1. Okay, so that's why acknowledgement number is 1 here. Okay, so this is basically the whole procedure of connection establishment. So there are only few things left. So we have already checked that there are 3 steps. So right now we want to talk about some type of flags. Okay, some type of flags. So these are known as flag bits or flag variables. So there are actually 9 types of flags included in TCP communication, but here I'm gonna talk about only 6 types of them. Okay, only 6 of them. Okay, so these are the different flags. So synchronization flag or SYN, acknowledgement flag or ACK, push flag or PSH, reset flag or RST, urgent flag or URG, and finish flag or FIN. Alright, so these are the 6 flags I'm going to be talking about. So all of the flags are actually 1 bit in size. Okay, so what we need to understand is that in each of those communication, doesn't matter whether it's happening from user to server or from server to user, in all of those communications, there will be some flags accompanying that specific communication. So let's check them out. So at the very first step right here, from the communication where the communication was from user to server, okay, in that specific communication, this is the very first communication and the connection was just being established. Okay, so in that place the synchronization flag will work. Okay, so why the synchronization flag will work? Because you can see it from the description that the only the first packet sent from each end should have this flag set. Okay, so this is the very first packet sent from user to server. So this packet, this communication right here should have the synchronization flag attached to it, because we're trying to send the very first packet and we're trying to establish a communication, so we need to synchronize between our side and the receiver side. That's why this synchronization flag is working in this very first step. Okay, so and there is definitely no kind of acknowledgement flag here, because this is the very first step and there was absolutely no types of communication in this phase, not from user to server and not from server to user before this communication. Okay, so there's nothing to acknowledge for. That's why there is no acknowledgement flag working at this step. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. So at the second step, you can see that this is the very first communication, this is the very first packet being sent from server to user. Since this is the very first packet from server to user, so yeah, I guess you have already guessed it, that at this step the synchronization flag will work again, because this is the very first packet sent from server to user. So the synchronization flag will work, and here you can see that the acknowledgement flag is working too. So why the acknowledgement flag is working now? Because before this communication, the server here actually got another communication from user. Okay, so another communication did take place before that. So that's why and at that specific step, 1 byte of data was also sent from user to server. So the server actually got 1 byte of data from the user previously, so it needs to acknowledge that fact that yeah, I have already got the data. So that's why this acknowledgement flag is working at this step. Okay, in our previous step, this was the very first step, so there was nothing to acknowledge for. That's why there was no acknowledgement flag working. But at this step, these both of the synchronization flag and the acknowledgement flag will be working. Okay, so let's move on to the okay, so this is the explanation that I talked about. Okay, so let's move on to the last step here, the last step of this connection establishment phase. You can see right here that at this step only acknowledgement flag is working, because you can see that at this step this is the step from user to server, but this is definitely not the first step from user to server. Yeah, so we have seen a few minutes ago, just in our previous slide, that the synchronization flag should only work whenever the first packet is sent from one side to the other. Okay, but this communication right here, this packet right here, is not the very first packet from user to server. We have actually sent a packet before right here. Okay, so this is actually not the first communication happening from user to server, so there will be no synchronization flag working here. Only the acknowledgement will work, because right at this communication the user is acknowledging the fact that yeah, I have received 1 byte from server, so I need to acknowledge that fact that yeah, I have received something from you, so I need to acknowledge that. That's why the acknowledgement flag is working here. Okay, so hopefully you have understood all the explanation behind all of those flags. Okay, so yeah, this is the explanation that I talked about. Okay, so this is basically how the scenario looks like right now. So this is the step of connection establishment, and after we are done with all of those 3 steps, then this connection establishment phase will be done. Okay, so this connection establishment phase is also known as three-way handshake. Okay, so why do you call it three-way handshake? Because as you can see that this whole phase is divided into 3 different steps. All right, this is the first step, this is the second step, and this is the last step. Okay, so those 3 steps are actually ensuring the fact that a connection has been established. So now you can go on and do your further works or anything you like. Okay, but now we are done with the connection part. So this connection establishment phase was done using those 3 steps. That's why this is known as a three-way handshake. So if you can just think about real life, then think about it like this, that I want to communicate with someone and I have already requested him so that we can collaborate. Okay, and then he will definitely respond. I'm assuming that he will respond. Then once he responds, then I'm just acknowledging the fact that yeah, I requested him for something and he responded, so now we can start working. Okay, so this is how we can actually set up our basic communication, and this is what is happening right here. So uh, those 3 steps are being set up uh, between both sides, user and the server, and these are there are 3 different steps. So basically they are working like handshakes. Okay, they are working like that if we are 2 people and we want to shake our hands together so that we can set up a mutual communication. So these protocol right here, this phase right here, connection establishment phase, is working like that. That's why it is known as three-way handshake. 3 different steps, so that's why three-way handshake. Okay, so you can also check out separate tutorials if you like about three-way handshake. You can find them at YouTube or in other websites too. Okay. So this is basically how our connection establishment phase looks like once we are done setting up the actual connection. So next we'll be talking about data transfer and other phases. So I'll be seeing you within a bit.